Hello and welcome. Thank you for coming to this evening's session on sexual violence, trauma, and healing. Before we begin our discussion, I want to mention a few things to help set the stage for tonight. This topic, as you know, is sensitive, and we want to be mindful of everyone who's in this virtual room with us right now. Everyone here in this virtual space brings a background and a wide array of experiences to this present moment. Perhaps you came here to learn how to help a friend you're worried about. Perhaps you came to explore some ideas to help yourself. Perhaps you came as a scholar eager to learn more about this important topic. Whatever your reason for coming, you belong here and you're welcome here. If you at any time you feel uncomfortable or triggered, please take care of yourself, whatever that looks like. Step away for a moment or seek out one of our counselors on a private chat. Our counselors can connect you with other resources as well. So we do have two counselors here kind of in the background, and I'm going to introduce them now. Therese Kewen is here from Wabanzi and Prem Nikunik from ECC. This is a co-sponsored event, and it's great to have us teamed together as two community colleges. If you wish to talk privately with one of them, please specify panelists only in the chat and request a counselor. Therese or Prem will respond privately via chat and can connect you separately, even through a phone conversation if that is the preference or if that's needed. This is intended to be a free-flowing conversation. If you have a question, please post it in the Q&A spot in this webinar. Chat comments are welcome too. You can post questions anonymously in the Q&A, but the chat will have your Zoom ID or name. Most questions will not be addressed till the end of the session, but the counselors and I will be monitoring and responding where possible. Also note that the session is being recorded for later use in college classrooms. Thank you for respecting the privacy and the individual lived experiences of everyone in this room tonight. Toward the end of the session, we'll share resources and a surprise free resource that you'll have access to, and also a link to evaluate this session. We hope that you will evaluate us as we're looking always for feedback. All right, without further ado, let's begin. Let's meet our panelists. We have three excellent professionals, amazing women that are going to speak with us from their professional and especially one of our speakers from a personal background. So please introduce yourself and a little bit about the role you play in your organization. Jenna Lee, do you want to get started?
Sure. Thank you, Kelly. My name is Jenna Lee Turner. My pronouns are she, her, and hers. I'm the Community Engagement Manager at Mutual Ground. At Mutual Ground, our mission is to provide education, awareness, and life-changing services to support individuals, families, and communities to interrupt the cycles of domestic and sexual violence. I've been working with victims of domestic and sexual violence for about 13 years now, and I've served on the Wabanzi Sexual Violence Awareness and Prevention Task Force for the last 6 years or so. I also serve as a confidential advisor for students and individuals in the Wabanzi community who are impacted by issues of sexual violence. I'm really glad to be here with you all tonight.
Thank you, Amanda.
Hi, my name is Amanda Augustine. I'm the Victim Services and Outreach Manager at the Association for Individual Development. Going forward, I will say AID. So AID's mission is to empower people with physical, developmental disabilities, and mental health challenges to enjoy lives of dignity and purpose. I've been working with victims for about 5 years now, and thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here.
We're happy to have you. And last but not least, May.
Hi, my name is May Alirad, and I am done here. Oh, okay, yes. And I am the founder and CEO of DLOW Coaching, whose mission is to empower survivors of assault to take control of their life. During this panel, I will represent the voice of survivors. I'm also an MSW, so I am a school social worker by trade for the last 14 years. Thank you for having me.
Thanks. Thanks, all three of you. So my first question has to do with trauma. Okay, trauma in the general sense. Each of you have seen trauma up close and personal. What does trauma look like? And what are the various human reactions to trauma that you've seen? Amanda, you want to take this one? kick it off?
Sure, thank you. So I think to start, it's important to say that trauma and crisis look different for everybody. Not everyone reacts or has a trauma reaction to every event that everybody else would. So for one person, a traumatic event might be a divorce. For another person, it might be the fact that they need financial assistance. It could be a death for a car crash. It really could be anything. It's trauma and crisis are definitely an event that are based on the person. And then I think some of the common symptoms is to have a traumatic reaction, it would be physical, it could be cognitive, emotional, behavioral. There's a lot of different kinds of reactions that you can have. So sometimes you might look like someone who very visibly is having a very hard time. And like when we were all discussing yesterday, May had pointed out that it also might be someone who, when you look at them, you would have no idea. So I think it's important to kind of just remember that it could be either or. Trauma and crisis are a spectrum.
Thank you. Jenna Lee, now getting a little more specific, can you speak a little more towards sexual trauma, sexual abuse trauma?
Yeah, like Amanda said, responses to sexual assault can include many different ways. So we know that rape trauma syndrome can present and manifest in a variety of ways. I've worked with victims who they seem sad or upset, or they might be angry, and those are all valid responses. And they're just as valid as the folks that I've worked with who maybe seem calm, or they seem kind of like they're making light of the situation, or they kind of seem like they've brushed to the side, or maybe they're just not ready to talk about it at all. And I think it's really important to recognize that all of these responses are 100% valid. So there's any infinite number of ways that a victim may respond after a sexual assault, and none of them mean that they weren't actually assaulted. I think sometimes we put a lot of pressure on victims to feel like they have to look or act a certain way, or if they have to be upset enough, or they have to be distraught enough after an assault. And the reality is that lots of folks respond in lots of different ways, and all of them are normal responses, and none of them invalidate what happened to them.
Do you spend time just helping the victims understand that part? Like, are they judging themselves even in their own reactions sometimes?
Yeah, I think sometimes when I've worked with folks, they will say things like, I should be more upset, or I should feel different, or, you know, it's terrible that I feel so angry, or they feel like they should respond in a different way. I think sometimes we have this expectation, this idea that survivors look a certain way. And I think survivors know that too, and they internalize that, or they feel like they need to respond in a certain way, or there's an appropriate response, and they put that additional pressure on themselves as well.
Interesting. Thank you. May, the survivor voice. So if you can tell us a little bit about little May, and just a little bit about your experience.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm going to begin sharing my story. So at the age of around 6 or 7, I was sexually assaulted by a friend on the church bus. And so after that, I then in turn started sexually assaulting other children. That went on for many years. And I think up until my adulthood, then I was sexually assaulted again by different partners, boyfriends, individuals that I was dating. So I have a long 25-year history of sexual assault. And so in regards to little May, that was my former younger self at age 6 or 7. And for such a long time, I really tried to pretend that she didn't exist, that, you know, because to acknowledge that she exists would really be to acknowledge that what happened to me was real. And I think by me repressing that, and by me not even acknowledging that or pretending that didn't happen, in a sense, it made me feel like those things didn't happen to me. It just was some distant memory. And for so long, I think pretended like it didn't happen. And I think I was holding so much guilt about not being able to remember even the details of it, you know, but it's something that I had been trying to forget for so long. And so all of a sudden I forgot it. And then I'm like, I don't know, I don't remember. And then there were questions of, well, does that even happen to me at all? So I think my mind was trying to tell me like, well, you don't remember the details, so maybe it didn't happen. Then I'm like, well, if that didn't happen, then why was I doing that? Or why was I then abusing other children? Why, so it was a lot of different questions. And I think it's just to circle back really quick with what Amanda and generally said in regards to just like responses. And I think oftentimes the grief response is very appropriate for individuals who go through trauma. And I think for me, there were periods in my life where I accepted it, like, okay, this happened to me. And then there were periods when I was like, no, this couldn't have happened. And it was like a lot of bargaining, I'm gonna get it out there, and trying to figure things out. And I think something to share with survivors out there or their supporters, that it could really be a cycle. It's not like, okay, I reach acceptance, I'm there, I'm healed, I'm totally healed. And although I do have my totally healed moment of going on my journey of self-actualization, which I may talk about a little bit later, and I do in my book, but every day is a new day. And at any point in time, I could still get triggered by something that I see, by something that I hear, by even my thoughts, any of my senses. I can at any point in time get triggered. But what I've learned are skills so that my trigger doesn't ruin my whole day, my whole week, or dive me into a deep depression, right? And that's the self-actualization journey that I am on right now.
Thank you so much. And it is like children, age 6 and 7, it's like their manifestation of different traumas is so different, right? I do want to ask you a little bit more about your childhood, maybe a little bit about your growing up time and what that, just tiny bit more information before we go on to the next topic.
Yeah, of course. So my family and I migrated to the US in 1989, and I was 4 years old at that time. And I remember being a very happy child. I remember someone asking me the fondest memory of being a child. I said, spinning on my back and watching Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. And I think that was just a great moment. And, shortly after that, at the age of 6 or 7, that was when I was sexually assaulted. And unfortunately, after that, my life really changed, in a way that I was trying to cope with what happened to me without I never told an adult about it. Nobody from school. I never told my parents about it. So as a young child in the first grade, I had to try to figure everything out myself. And so it was very difficult. And I know my therapist at that time, she always tried to help me, like, I think, not be so hard on myself, because I'm like, well, I was a victim and then I became the predator. And she's like, May, you were 7 years old. Like, okay, like, you don't have the knowledge that you have now at 36, 30 years ago. So you're okay. And, I think, still, I think it's a matter of knowing, but being able to internalize that. And I also include this in my book, like just letters like that I've written, to the people that I have hurt as part of my healing process. So
Thank you. So moving on to college, right? So little May is turning into late teens, young adult May. I wanted to just share just a little bit. I know you're a community college grad, May. In the community college setting, we often will have students in our classrooms and other spaces who've experienced trauma in their lives, sexual or otherwise. We serve half of the nation's college students, and a greater majority of low-income and first-generation students are enrolled in community colleges. We're typically not residential. Our students are often managing work, family, and other huge commitments and life stressors, in addition to whatever baggage or trauma, they could be carrying with them in their classes. And I guess, we talk a lot about trauma-informed. So I guess I'll start with Amanda. I'm not going to run through all of you every time. We can keep just kind of the conversation rolling, but what are some of the things we can do as colleges to be more trauma informed and sensitive to the hidden student issues that we may not see?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think when it comes to trauma informed, I think, there are a lot of different tools that you can utilize. I think one thing, and I know May has said it's helped her, is like consistency, is to make sure to try to be as predictable as you can. So having kind of like a set schedule, kind of giving confident feedback. So even if you have to give some kind of feedback, make sure you're not, dumbing the person down, or you're not doing anything that could be more harmful. Try to keep it positive, and just like a good feedback. So make sure you're kind of giving that feedback, but it's not going to do it in a harming way. So like, don't tell someone you're stupid. That's common knowledge, right? But unfortunately, sometimes people do that. And I think also that just being an active listener, I think active listening is one of the biggest tools and skills that anyone could use, even if someone's not asking for help. If someone doesn't come right out and say, I've been sexually assaulted, they might try to test the waters to start talking about little things with you that could eventually turn into, hey, okay, I know that I have built rapport with you. I know that you've been someone who's listened to me in the past. I'm now ready to come forward and say, hey, I went through a traumatic event. I've been sexually assaulted. So I think just kind of being that listening ear has always been really helpful. And then I would also say that, making them feel valued. I think feeling valued can really help with self-esteem. I think it can kind of help with a lot of different factors in and out of the classroom. So they may not feel valued at home, or they may not be feeling valued at work, but to try to gain that confidence a little bit to say, hey, I do need that help. I think those are just a couple different tools that you can utilize.
Thank you. And you mentioned a couple things, faculty may not, they may get approached, right? And we have Title IX information at the college level that we can make available to both, faculty and staff at the college and students. But it's helping lend an ear to a student who does want to disclose to you, who feels like they trust you enough, but also knowing where to plug them into resources. We don't expect faculty to be therapists, and we want to help any student whenever we can. And I do think that consistency piece makes sense for so many reasons, to the greatest extent possible, right? Like that predictability. May, you are clearly like, our survivor voice in the room, right? You're clearly a college success story despite your struggles. But so many good students can fall through the cracks and not complete their college credentials, right? Ending up in debt with no degree, and that can cycle into more poverty, more trauma, et cetera. So I guess I'm asking, is there anything from your perspective, or Jenna-Lee, feel free to chime in too, is there anything from your perspective that community colleges or colleges could do to better support students with traumatic backgrounds?
Right, great question. I had a really great experience at Elgin Community College. Everyone was so friendly. They were so helpful to me. And everything that I needed help with, from financial aid, my classes, anything, I had at least one person in every department that I would go to my go-to person, right? But even with that, even though I trusted them and I feel like I had a good relationship with all those individuals, I still didn't share my trauma with them. I still didn't share what I went through. And I think a lot of that really had to do with my own personal ability to deal with it, which was to not deal with it. I think how I dealt with it was to compartmentalize, was to disassociate, and to pretend like it wasn't there, just to, okay, if I don't think about it, it's not real, it's not there. And so I think that's how I personally have been able to be so successful, right? Quote unquote, graduating within, with my master's degree in 5 years, and a house, car, all of that, because I just didn't deal with it in those ways. But I think that really at the community college level, really having an open door policy, I think is really the best. And I think when people are ready, and like Amanda, I think alluded to, like when people are ready, they'll come and share, if they know that they can talk to you, if they know that they've talked to you about little things and you've been very compassionate and empathetic about those things to their plight, then I think they'll be more willing when they have a breaking point, or when they're like, I need to talk to someone, that it's more likely than not that they'll come to you. So I think just anticipating that, I think back to the word of trauma informed, just anticipating to be kind, caring, compassionate individuals, right? Staff, faculty, and knowing that people are coming from all different walks of life, I think, especially in the community college. You get all from 18 up until 100 plus, we have no age limit for community college, but just really being caring, kind, compassionate, respectful, I think, to all individuals regardless. And I think that if there's a community culture of that in every classroom, I think social emotionally students will be more willing to open up.
Hear, hear.
Bounce off of that too. I think when someone comes to you, and this isn't just for a classroom sake, but anywhere, if anyone ever comes to you, always having like an empathetic response. So if someone comes up to you and says, hey, I was sexually assaulted, have your response be something like, I'm so sorry that happened to you. I'm here for you. It's not your fault. Little things like that are kind of taking the blame off of them and letting them know, like, this is not okay. And that's actually something I learned through Mutual Ground's 60-hour domestic violence training. So shout out to them. But that's definitely something that I think is really important when someone comes forward to you and lets you know.
Thank you. I just posted our Title IX link because, it's, I just think that there are a lot of services, and, if someone does confide, we want to make sure people feel comfortable. But I don't know if you all know this, but colleges are required to go through training now, so that there is sort of a, and it's still kind of hard if you don't deal with this all the time, to have someone confide that level of information to you. It's it kind of intense, right? So I think that it's, it can feel awkward, but just being your genuine self and caring, and the training that is offered, it's online training more now, but it's like, what are some of the words that you would say? Like, I feel terrible that happened to you. You don't deserve this, things like that. Jenna Lee, let's hear from you. PTSD, trauma stats related to sexual violence. Anything you want to add to this conversation?
Yeah, I think it's important to recognize that victims of sexual assault can be folks of all genders. We know that female identified folks are at greater risk of victimization, but that doesn't mean that folks who are male identified, cis male or trans male, wouldn't also be at risk of experiencing sexual assault. So I think it's really important that our conversations like we're having tonight are gender neutral, and we're recognizing that lots of different people can be impacted by sexual assault issues. We also know that that college students are at greater risk of victimization too. There's something about being in the college environment, being mixed with so many different folks and different opportunities to drink and party and to hang out with peers and to get involved in extracurriculars, provides more opportunities and more risk of experiencing sexual assault. So I think it's really important to be aware of the resources that are available on campus. Kelly mentioned that staff and faculty are required to participate in training, and the schools are also required to provide confidential advisors and other support services. So you can always reach out to your counseling services team or your Title IX teams if you have any concerns, or if you want to talk to somebody about something that happened.
Thank you. May, you had said something, and I just want to kind of touch on that, the PTSD thing too, because you said, like, even this many years later and you feel like you're in a better place, but this can hit you out of the blue. You can feel triggered, you can feel anxious. Tell us a little more about that. I want to segue a little bit toward what that's like, and then what is healing like? How did you begin to start healing?
So basically for me, sometimes it's predictable and sometimes it's not. I think the best thing to do is try to predict them. So at my job, there is this man that reminds me of somebody that assaulted me. And so every time, and I have to go to his class once a week, granted it's virtual, but still I have to see him every week. And so before I go in there, I literally have to give myself a pep talk. Like, okay, he is not that guy. I'm safe. I'm okay. He can't hurt me anymore. So these are different self-talks that I have to tell myself. And so I didn't even know that I was getting triggered, I think, until like every time I heard his voice or every time I saw him, like my heart would start beating really fast. And I would just get like real nervous and jittery. And I'm like, what is going on? And then when I really took the time to think about it, I was like, wow, he reminds me of that guy that did that terrible thing to me. And so I think what that really shows to me is that even if you can't remember like consciously, your body still remembers. Your body still remembers what it feels like, what it was, and it's still really, really scary. One time, and I wrote this in my book, one time my husband and I were in an intimate situation, and all of a sudden popped in my mind this image of this guy, another guy that sexually assaulted me. And I literally wanted to jump outside of my skin. It was so scary. Like, to be in an intimate, situation and then have this image pop in your mind. I literally, like, if I could, I would have jumped outside of my whole body. And so now that I couldn't predict that. I had no idea that was coming, but I added that in the book because what happened was I recognized what was going on. And then I realized that I was getting triggered. I realized that I just got triggered. So what I did was, true story, I went through my mind of Rolodex of what did I write in my book on grounding? Okay, do I have any sight, grounding techniques that I could use? Do I have any sound? Do I have any touch? Do I have anything in taste? And on my way to work, I realized, okay, let me listen to some music to ground myself, right? So within half an hour, I was able mentally to get to a better place, pre-triggered, right? So we're talking 30 minutes. In the past, it would have been a day, the whole week, the whole month, I'm off. Like, whoa, I just got all the way thrown off. And part of healing, Kelly, is not like when I first started therapy, my first session, I was like, wow, I'm going to be so healed and I'm never going to get triggered again. And oh my gosh, I'm going to be so healed. And that was my first thought in therapy, how healed I was going to be. I was so excited.
And then 2 days later, you were like, why aren't I healed already?
No, 2 years later.
Yeah.
Yes, 2 years later, I'm like, okay, where is this healing that I'm supposed to be getting? And I love my first therapist. I love her. She was amazing. And I feel like she helped me to get to the place where I'm at right now with my self-actualization, right? Because what therapy did for me was it gave me a vocabulary of boundaries. It gave me a vocabulary of triggers, right? Those are words that I had never known before. And it's empowering to actually have those words and say, I'm being triggered right now, or I need to have better boundaries. Like, you're crossing my boundary, like you're physically in my space, or I can't talk to you about this right now. And before that, I had no boundaries. Like, whatever I was doing, I would drop it to help someone else and put everyone else's matters or importance above mine, but I learned that no, I matter. My thoughts matter. And so one of the things that I think sexual assault does to you is when you tell someone no and they still do it anyways, then you learn that your voice doesn't matter. Okay? That your voice doesn't matter anymore. And that ultimately you internalize that and you think, I don't matter. So it goes from your voice doesn't matter to you don't matter as a human being, as a person. And so I struggled with self-esteem, my God, all my life, because I didn't think I mattered. And I didn't think that what I had to say mattered. I didn't think my voice mattered. And I was always really like, okay, it's fine, like letting people push me around or whatever, like, oh no, whatever everybody says. And ever since really finding my voice, I realized, no, my voice matters. What I think matters. What I say matters. And it's just really a place of empowerment.
I'm so intrigued by so much of what you just said. And you spoke of the body and you spoke of the mind. And, even if your mind is telling you you're okay, your body remembers. And you made me think of a title, The Body Keeps the Score, Bessel van der Kolk. And I don't know this real well, but I just am so fascinated by trauma and how we internalize things, even pass it down to our children. It's I don't know. Does anyone have any profound comments to add on that before I go on to the next topic? Because there's so much to this research and they're finding out so much more about early childhood trauma, that neurologically wiring and things like that. It's just fascinating.
Yeah, I just want to add really fast, Kelly. A couple years ago, I helped with the research with the University of Chicago on trauma and intergenerational trauma from refugee communities. So I was one of I called myself the research assistant. So I wear many hats, okay? Many hats. So I'm also the executive director for a nonprofit organization called Lao American Organization of Elgin. And so when I was, so I'm still doing that. So as the executive director, we worked with the University of Chicago on a trauma study. It was an intergenerational trauma. And so what we did was we interviewed the parents and gave them a set of questions. And then we interviewed their child and asked them the same questions, well, similar questions. But what the research wanted to try to find was the trauma of the parents being refugees, because that's very traumatic. Uprooting your whole life and going to another country, and even me, like we went from Laos to Thailand at the refugee camp, all of that, and coming to America. And if that trauma got passed down from the parent to the child. So that was what that research was about.
So interesting. You mentioned a little bit about intergenerational trauma, but I do also want to give you, before I go to that, I want to find out what was the decision for writing your book, and tell us a little more about that. Like you had a moment where, okay, you're never going to be 100% healed all the time. This is still going to resurface, but what made you want to help others? What made you get to this point where you're telling your story out loud to lots of people?
Right. So I had been trying to write a book for the past 10 years because I knew that what happened to me, what was inside, I needed to share that. But every time I sat in front of that computer, I just got really nervous. I got really scared. I don't know. It was like me reliving it again, but in a scary way. It was like very scary. So I couldn't. And it took me 10 years to get to this point. But what happened was, it really started in 2018 when I went to a new church that taught about faith and healing, and not just faith in God or anything like that, but faith in yourself to believe in your healing, and not just healing in your physical body, but your mental, spiritual, emotional healing. And that it took me 2.5 years of listening to that teaching to get to a point of I call it my September 13th, 2020 revelational, self-actualizational journey, when I finally got to this point that I'm at right now. And my friend and I, we were praying together, and all of a sudden, I just felt like all of that shame, guilt, fear, condemnation, everything that has been associated with my assault just lifted off of me. Like kind of like I had been carrying a backpack for 30 years from the age of 6 to 7 until 36. Like I was carrying this backpack, and all of a sudden somebody like took that backpack off of me. I was like, wow, I don't have these bricks on my back anymore. And I'm like, I can fly. Like that's what I was feeling. Like I was so free that I just literally said to God, I was like, you know what, God, the feeling that I feel right now, I want everyone in this whole world to be able to feel that. I want everyone that has ever been assaulted to feel this freedom that I have, that all the loneliness, shame, all of that, embarrassment, I was just free from that. And then a few months later, I wrote a book. I made a decision to write a book. I was so healed. I mean, that I wrote it in a book. I mean, you guys, that's like serious. I mean, I put some, and Jenna Lee and Kelly, I put some really deep things in there. Like, May, why would you tell the world? I know, why would I? But I put it in there because I wanted to be so real. I wanted to be so real to my readers. I wanted to be honest, transparent. I wanted it to be raw, unapologetically honest, because nothing about sexual violence is beautiful. All of it is ugly. And I wanted to be able to really manifest all of that in a book, but also in every chapter, give hope.
Yeah.
Every single chapter, there are about 3 to 5 reflections, and they give you hope. Like you saw where I started off, and then you saw my process, and you at the end are like, okay, I can work through this. I can work through low self-esteem. I can work through boundaries. I can work through triggers or losing my voice. And so the book is really like a workbook, more of a workbook and less of like, let me read it through book.
Okay. So I wonder if we have this amazing person behind the scenes named Gaia Moy, who's running this webinar, and she might throw out the book is available free for 3 days, right? So if you'd like to download it now, it's going to be in the chat. We'll keep talking, but wanted to make sure you knew that you could download it from Amazon for free. So you'll be seeing that fairly soon, that link in the chat. And I see some great comments. You are so brave, and sharing that bravery will definitely give hope to others. Thank you. You're remarkable. And then some discussion of parenting. And I don't know if anyone wants to jump into this one. I think it's really fascinating how parenting can affect someone's love attachment style. I'm not sure if it's relevant, but I wanted to bring it up. Sometimes people have a twisted idea of love and affection and end up hurting others and or themselves. So you talked about acting out as a child, right? Some behaviors that you really regretted that brought you shame, but adults do this too, right? In different ways and end up hurting others. I don't know, Jenna Lee, you want to take that one?
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. At Mutual Ground, we have a family services team that's really focused on serving young people and their families. We believe that every parent is just doing the best that they can. And many times survivors of domestic and sexual violence are managing their own trauma and still trying to parent at the same time. I think it's true, especially for victims of domestic violence, where there may or may not be sexual assault as well. Oftentimes they receive messages that they're a terrible parent, or maybe a victim of sexual violence might internalize that they were a terrible person growing up. Like May said, she had some sexually acting out behaviors, or she wasn't a good partner, or some things that happened early in her life. And so I think sometimes parents can take some of those behaviors and accidentally project them on their children. I think it's really important to recognize different ways that you might need some support, or you might like some help with parenting, and reach out to a program like Mutual Ground, where we can provide some additional support. We have some parenting groups where we focus on providing supports for parents and helping them understand how to set boundaries or how to support their children's strengths. But I think it's really important to just engage with empathy. I don't think honestly, I don't think there are bad parents in the world. I think that all parents are really doing the best that they can. And lots of times folks are managing their own trauma and other things. We shared the hotline for Mutual Ground in the chat as well. So if you would like any support with parenting services, definitely reach out to us. We'd be glad to offer some support and resources or connect you with someone who can.
That's terrific. Thank you. I wanted to talk just a little bit about just the last couple months. In May, you're a good example for this, but others may want to chime in about your own personal selves. But, May, you became an outspoken advocate for Asian women and children, especially after the horrors in Atlanta about a month ago, maybe 5 weeks ago now. The murders were of an Asian woman in Atlanta by a man with a sexual addiction, quote unquote, who wanted to eliminate his quote unquote temptation. How did that news affect you, and what made you decide to speak out?
It was really appalling, I think, to hear that. I think it was really shocking that he would blame the victims. I think the first, I don't know about anybody else, but for me, in my ears, when I heard that getting rid of the temptations, he frequented the parlors, like I was like, wow, he's trying to blame the victims for killing them. I couldn't believe it. I mean, I don't know about other people. I know we probably all felt the same way because we're all in this field, but to other people, they may not have known that. Like, I was on a podcast today, and a lot of things that I said, he was really shocked. He was like, so we shouldn't ask if the person resisted? Like, did you resist getting sexually assaulted? Like, no, you should not ask that. Like, it doesn't matter if they resisted or not. Like, there's so many different responses to sexual assault: freeze, flight, fight. I mean, so many responses. So even if I lay there, that doesn't mean I'm asking for it, so it was just appalling. So back to Kelly's question, it was just really appalling. And the thing is that this was not the first time that this has happened to Asian women, right? Asian women have been sexualized for centuries, okay, not decades. Centuries, not a couple weeks, no, hundreds of years. When Asian women first came to the United States, they came as sex workers. They came as prostitutes, right? The Chinese women that came, because at that time, the Chinese men came over to build the railroads in California. So Asian women were brought over to sexually please white and Asian men. That's why they came. And so from there, the media has perseverated this objectification, this sexualization of Asian women, even movies, Rush Hour, right? You open the door and you have 20, 30 Asian women there that will take care of all your needs, right? Like, that's not okay. And messages like that really perseverate the objectification of Asian women. And as a 100% Asian woman myself, it's not okay. It's not okay. Even when people joke around and say things like, me love you long time, and think that's funny. No, it's not funny. And guess what? Every time someone says it, I stop them in their track right away and let them know that's not funny. I'm not laughing, and don't say that anymore around me. It's not okay, because comments like that make it okay. Oh, it was just a joke. No, it's not funny. And it's really seriously damaging. It's very damaging to Asian women.
Thank you. Any other comments on intersectionality? I mean, as we work with our own trauma, we bring everything, right? Our religious beliefs, our spirituality, our sexual identity, our ethnicity, our background, our childhood. Little May is in there still, right? Yeah, thank you. So many complexities, So putting your story in book form, it took a lot of courage. And we do have in the chat how to access. And we've got a couple more things that people are sharing in the chat, which is great. This is feeling, I wanted this to feel like a conversation. It really does. So I want to hear any words of wisdom that Jenna-Lee, Amanda, or May want to share. We're kind of coming up on the end. So if you want to throw some questions out, whether it's chat or Q&A, although the Q&A, it's kind of not real hopping, but I do see there's information about more about trauma related to post-secondary. So any of the college folks in the room that might be interested, there's a link to Illinois State and equity resources related to trauma. Yeah, good stuff.
Kelly, I wanted to talk a little bit about delayed disclosures, if that's okay.
Oh, yeah, great.
Yeah, so May talks a lot in her book, and even in our conversation here, she said it took her 30 years to unpack what happened to her and the various assaults that had happened over time. And I think it's really important to recognize that that can be really common. Victims of sexual violence don't always come forward or don't always share or report to law enforcement or even seek help or even tell friends or family. And that's okay. In May's book, she talks a little about like burying these memories in this garden and just having this idea that she can just tamp them down and they'll just go away. And if I don't think about it, then it never happened. And I just really want to support and validate that, because we often see that with adult survivors of child sexual abuse or even adult survivors of sexual assault. They may not be ready to talk about it. They might take some time to really sort through what happened and try to figure out how they feel about it. So it's not uncommon for someone to tell you a couple weeks or a couple months or even a few years later that something happened to you. I think sometimes when we receive those disclosures, it can be really easy for us to say, oh, I'm offended. Why didn't you tell me this earlier? Or, I'm your parent. I care about you. Or I'm your best friend. How could you never tell me this? And I think some of those, I think those are all really normal reactions, but I think that they also create space where maybe that survivor doesn't feel safe telling more people. And so it's really important that we try to use some of those phrases that Amanda brought up earlier, where we say things like, I believe you, and it's not your fault. Or even just saying, I'm not really sure what to say right now. I'm just so glad that you told me. May, were there some other things that folks told you along the way that felt really supportive and affirming for you?
I think for the majority of the individuals that I told, it wasn't very supportive or affirming. And I think that's why I decided to repress it some more. And so generally, I'm so glad you mentioned that. But yeah, because their responses were, well, what were you wearing? Or, well, why were you over his house? I mean, it was like, I felt like I was being interrogated. Like, I'm telling you this terrible thing that happened to me and you're interrogating. And what I want to add is that don't interrogate the person, right? And generally quoted from Brea Brown on empathy, and that when someone tells you that, this is in the book in case you can't remember, okay? This is in the book, the one sentence, two sentence is, wow, I don't even know what to say right now. I'm just so glad you told me, because I think we put so much pressure on ourselves to respond correctly. Like, oh my gosh, how do I respond? Well, at least he didn't beat you up. Like, that's not a good response. Don't say that. Do not say that. Okay. Trust me. Well, at least he didn't put a gun to your head. Like, what? No, that's not helpful. It's like traumatizing me more. So really just saying that, like, wow, I'm just so glad you told me. Like, I don't even know what to say. And giving that person the space to share as much and as little as they feel comfortable with. I think the most important thing is you are not an investigator. Okay, don't try to investigate the person's life. You're just a listening, caring ear. That's all you are, right? I think there are times where you can, if the person asks, like, what can I do? Like, how can I get some help? Like, then you can say, oh, counseling services, and make recommendations, like Mutual Ground or, other agencies that work with survivors of assault. And I think definitely just knowing where they can go get help and making those recommendations, like, and just say, hey, you may not be ready now, but if you are, I can help you, take this ride with you. I can help you call Mutual Ground with you, and I think just being there. Mm-hmm. Don't try to have all the right answers, because trust me, you don't have the right answers. Yeah. And even if I ask you the question, trust me, it's not the answer I want to hear. You cannot give me the answer I want to hear. Why did he rape me? You can't give me that answer, right? So really, it's just being present with them And like I said, letting them share as much or as little as they want. And I think those are the best responses. And I wish somebody would have done that to me.
Yeah.
I think that's really important, May, because I know that like when I'm helping victims, I know kind of going back to something you said, don't bombard them either, not even like with questions, but I think it's great when people know resources and they have resources, but it's it has to take the survivor. They have to be able to say, okay, I'm ready to take this next step. I'm ready to do this. And I know a lot of the times it comes from a place of caring where people are like, you have to go to the police, you have to press charges, you have to do A, B, C, D, E. That person may not be ready, and that's okay. There is no right and wrong way to handle, being sexually assaulted. There's not, like Jenny said earlier, every response is valid. So even if you do have those resources and you want to come from that place of caring, try to like May's been saying, just try to be that active listener and saying, hey, these are your options. Whenever you're ready, I would be more than happy to make that call with you. I'll sit in the waiting room with you if you want to go to a counseling appointment, but don't try to make it a forced kind of resolution.
Thank you. We're coming up on, it's about 6:53. And before we go to any more sort of we have some Q&As, so I want to make sure I'm catching those. But I also want to say this was a great conversation, and we'll keep chatting. But I also want to say to our panelists, like, thank you. You bring so much expertise and so much passion for the work you're doing. And May, you have boundless energy. I just, I'm really in awe of what you've accomplished in the past few weeks. And it's really been cool to work with you and to know you during this time. I would like to say that this past year with the pandemic has had a certain level of trauma for all of us. And, obviously some of us have lost family members or, suffered from illness ourselves or haven't seen a lot of close people in our lives for a long time. So I think there's some level of trauma that we all are enduring even as we speak, and we don't know what that'll look like a few months from now. And so I want to be mindful of that, but I'm hoping each of you just share a general word of advice or hope for our students. And so anyone who wants to go in, I'm going to take a look at the Q&A and feed them back to you if appropriate.
You know what, Kelly, you kind of cut off a little bit.
Oh, I'm sorry.
So I couldn't hear what the last part was. So I was like, what are we supposed to be saying?
So we can close this with any advice, like just a word of hope or advice for us.
Oh, okay.
But someone did ask you, so I'll type, if people delay disclosure of sexual assault, are there steps that can be taken in the legal system to help them heal and get justice?
Yeah, Kelly, there are many different options available to victims of sexual violence. I think sometimes people focus a lot on the statutes of limitations, and it's not always applicable to all cases. So I've worked with victims who were assaulted many years ago, and the statutes of limitations had run up, but they were still able to report, and they were still able to support another case, and they were able to seek justice on behalf of another victim and hold that offender accountable. So there are an infinite number of options available to survivors. Currently in the state of Illinois, there is no statute of limitations for sex crimes against minors and adults. So we have a fantastic opportunity now for victims to feel empowered to come forward and to seek making police reports or seek judicial process on their own. But you can always reach out to an advocate, and we can walk you through the various options that may be available through civil or criminal procedures.
Thank you. That doesn't make it easy, right? But there's an avenue for sure. There's a pathway. Next question is, May, what kept you from opening up and telling your family and friends when it first happened?
So when it first happened, I was 6-7 years old. So at that time, I didn't know anything about sexual assault. And so it was just scary. I think for me as a child in first grade, okay, so we're going to put it down to grades now. Sometimes it's easier for people to understand. As a child in first grade, I was terrified. And I was afraid that my parents would yell at me, that my parents would be mad at me. I was afraid that my parents would say it was my fault, because the child who did that to me had a cognitive disability. Like, so he cognitively may or may not have known what he did to me. And so I felt, me in my right mind, why did I sit next to him? But the truth of the matter is he was a friend, and he had never done anything like that before to me. My sister and I would go play games, video games, at his house with his brother. So I felt comfortable with him. But when it happened, I placed so much blame on myself, so much blame and shame. And I really felt like it was my fault. I think another thing is that I didn't really have that good relationship with my parents. I think the reason may have been culturally, because I am from the Asian background, and I can only speak about the Laotian community, right, from Laos. And our background is very stoic. It's not a lot of lovey feeling, huggy, tell me about your day thing. It's really not very affectionate in that way. And so I didn't really have a good relationship in that way with my parents. Like, they never told me they love me. They never gave me a hug, and it's culturally, and it's really a terrible thing, really. And just not about 15 years back, when my father became disabled, I was like, I don't care about culture. I don't want my dad to die and me never giving him a hug in his life, or for me to tell him I love him. And I broke whatever cultural barriers were there to tell my parents that I love them, that I care about them. But yeah, I think it was because I didn't really have a good relationship with them. And I was on a panel just on Saturday with Daughters Lives Matter, talking about how to build that trust with your child, how to build a loving, trusting relationship with them, so that they will tell you, they will come and report to you when something like this happens. And I think the second thing is something that I'll be starting to work on next month. And this is the first time I'm saying it in a panel discussion, but I'm putting together a curriculum, prevention curriculum for pre-K to high school students. So we're looking at age 3 to 18 for educators and for parents, on how we can start these talks with our children. So, for lack of better terms, so everyone knows what I'm talking about, it'll be a good touch, bad touch curriculum for both parents and educators. And I think that's so important, because I honestly believe in my heart, and little May, that if I was taught this in school and it happened to me, I would have felt empowered and be like, oh, this isn't my fault. I learned about this. And I would have been more inclined to tell someone. So, a lot of reasons. That's what I can come up with without going back 30 years.
Thank you. And we're at 7 o'clock, so I'm going to wrap up now and say thank you to our audience. Big special thanks to Gaia Moy. I wish you would come on screen and take a bow. I don't know if you can, but she set up this webinar for us. Hugs to May, Amanda, Jenna Lee, thank you so much. This is really interesting, and I really appreciate your taking time out tonight to talk through this stuff. Download the book. It's free. It's digital right now. I believe paperbacks will be available soon too, but those will probably be for purchase. But yeah, it's May has a really unique voice that she brings to this, and it's time for her to be heard. It's time to hear other survivors. Thank you, everybody. Thanks to our counselors too. Good night, everyone.